The 2023 NFL draft could and likely will go down as the best draft in the history of the Houston Texans franchise. We all remember where we were. The Texans acquire C.J. Stroud. All of a sudden, they trade up. They acquire WillAnderson. They take advantage and take care of perhaps the most important position in all of sports, definitely in football, the quarterback, and you get the leader of your defense in DeMeco Ryan's defense for a long time to come. It is the locker room number one source for Texans digital content. The Texans preparing for the draft and the NFL Combine. I'll be on the scene with Cody Stoots, SNL, which you can hear Monday through Friday live at 4 o'clock. But I think there is a big difference, and this is kind of what I want to dive into, and this is kind of encouraging for the Texans as they prepare for the 2025 NFL draft. There's a difference between best and most impressive. And I think the 2023 draft, if you're asking me to list the most impressive displays, I think the 2024 draft, the second installment and the only other version of the draft performed by DeMeco Ryans and Nick Caserio was actually more impressive. And let me explain this. Anyone could have taken C.J. Stroud and used the draft equity that the Texans had to get arguably the best player in the draft in WillAnderson. A lot of times you just have the assets, you have the equity, and you make the right decision. So you went with C.J. Stroud at number 2. You used your extra draft equity that you acquired in the Watson trade, and you traded and you got WillAnderson. Not everyone has that opportunity, and not everyone has that equity. It's good to execute. It can arguably be more important, and it can arguably be more beneficial in the long run. I don't even think you have to argue it. But the most impressive display by the Texans was last year in 2024, where the Texans traded back 19 spots. They acquired Stephon Diggs, and they acquired the number 1 cornerback in the draft in Kamari Lassiter, and they drafted Blake Fisher, not for immediate need, but for need in the future. And why do the Texans benefit from this? And why am I saying this? Cornerback and tackle are 2 of the hardest things to acquire. The Texans, you can say they got lucky with Kamari Lassiter, but had they never made the Diggs trade and they would have taken Kamari Lassiter and with the first pick of the draft, it still would have been, or their first pick in the draft, it still would have been a steal. And they were able to acquire the best corner in the draft, and they got a tackle who they feel like can be a tackle of the future. Could you imagine if the Texans were heading into this draft and they needed a tackle or corner? You'd be in no man's land. Corners and tackles get overpaid in free agency. A lot of times at 25 late in the draft, the best ones have gone. You can still find guys, there's still exceptions, but you're kind of in no man's land when it comes to that. The Texans last year were able to acquire 2 premium positions, and they didn't have the max draft equity that they had when they acquired C.J. Stroud and WillAnderson. So you're going into this draft, you need to fix the offense, but you don't need those positions. And oh, by the way, another elite position, edge guy, you acquired WillAnderson and you acquired C.J. Stroud. So in 2 years, the Texans, they've gotten pretty good at the marquee elite positions. And in one of their drafts, the 2024, they did so with limited draft equity. That's important. That's where you get better as a franchise, where you don't necessarily draft for need, although corner was a need, but you put yourself in position to where drafts down the line or one draft down the line, you're not just in desperate need. It's a lot easier to find a wide receiver than it is find a tackle or a corner. I don't feel like most teams have 2 good corners. The Texans have 2 really good corners. There's not a GM in the world that wouldn't have drafted C.J. Stroud number 2 overall. That was what was going to happen. Fortunately for DeMeco Ryans, they had the draft equity as a result of the lack of success the 2 years before, the process over results that Nick Caserio spoke of, and they were able to get C.J., and then they had the draft equity to go get WillAnderson. Not everybody had that. And then when you're in a position to where your first pick in the draft is in the second round, you get the best corner. And then with your next pick, before the tackle run starts, you get perhaps the tackle of the future. Just imagine if we would have watched Titus Howard play last year and you were in need of a tackle. You were in desperate need of a tackle. It would feel like you were kind of lost. The Texans could have easily drafted for need. And a case can be made last year. We hadn't seen Titus Howard at right tackle in a long time with Laramie Tunsil. Case could have been made, and a case was made that tackle wasn't their most important thing. When they initially made the pick, I didn't know what the hell was going on. As the days went on, we started talking about chess versus checkers, and that's what the Texans did. And now they're reaping the benefits of it. And oh, by the way, you saw Blake Fisher last year get some starts at right tackle. Still a lot of development there, but you feel good about it. Like if you were picking in this year's draft and Blake Fisher was there at 25, there's a chance you would probably take him. He's already on your roster. He's already developing. He's already in your building. So checkers versus chess is important. And that's the most popular debate when you head into a draft is need versus best player available. A lot of times when you don't draft for need, it might not benefit you in the short term, checkers, but it benefits you in the long term, chess. That's what the Texans did with Blake Fisher. A lot of time you're in no man's land when you have needs. They were able to acquire Kamari Lassiter, best corner in the draft last year in the second round. That's impressive. Not everybody can pull that off. You give a GM the second and the 12th pick and 2 first-round picks the next year, second and the 12th, and 2 first-round picks the next year, they might be able to pull off the C.J. Stroud, WillAnderson thing. You can't pull off getting Kamari Lassiter and maybe a tackle in the future with 2 second-round picks. Oh, and by the way, acquiring Stephon Diggs by trading back 19 spots. And there's a lot of people that will criticize the Stephon Diggs deal because they look at it as just a second-round pick. When the Texans made that trade with the Vikings, they knew what they were going to do with that second-round pick. And they essentially traded back 19 spots for Stephon Diggs. If they hadn't traded back and they would have taken Kamari Lassiter there, no one would say anything because they would have gotten the best corner in the draft. They were able to add a veteran receiver, kick the tires on him, 1-year deal, and they were able to acquire Kamari Lassiter and Blake Fisher a little bit later on. You look at need versus best player available. We can go back to like the millennial age. Packers didn't need Aaron Rodgers when they drafted him. They ended up reaping the benefits, multiple MVPs, and they ended up making run after run after run. The Vikings didn't need Randy Moss when they drafted him. Got one of the best receivers of all time. Biggest news in the NFL right now. Cooper Kupp could be traded. There's talk about, does he fit in with the Texans? Now, naturally, part of the reason he's being traded is because he's having the natural decline that happens when you get that age. But you know another reason why? Because when the Rams had Cooper Kupp, it didn't prevent them from drafting Puka Nacua, one of the best young slot receivers in the game. So they can afford to get rid of Cooper Kupp. It didn't stop them from drafting Jordan Whittington last year, who they also like, who they feel good about backing up Puka. So the Texans have put themselves in position to where heading into this draft, they're actually in a pretty good spot. And quite frankly, they've shown that whether it's at the top of the draft or whether it's in the second round, they can acquire elite talent. And I think it's more impressive that they were able to do it last year as opposed to when they had prime draft equity. You got to feel good about what the Texans got going when it comes to the way they've executed in the draft. And it's not just one way of doing things. They've done it in multiple ways. And what do they have to show for it? They have a hopeful franchise quarterback in C.J. Stroud, a Pro Bowl caliber edge guy who's only going to get better in WillAnderson. And then they have Kamari Lassiter, who's one of the best young corners in the league, might be the other half of the best corner duo in the league. And they have Blake Fisher, who's going to be one of their starting tackles this year. There's a difference between best and important. In the big scheme of things, it doesn't matter because they're all on your roster. But it's really encouraging, and I think it's impressive. And I don't think DeMeco Ryans and Nick Caserio get enough credit for pulling off what they pulled off last year in 2024. There was a lot of reaction with the Blake Fisher pick. I was shocked. But it starts to make sense. You can play chess. You can play checkers. What are those opportunities for the Texans this year? Maybe they decide they want to look at an edge guy because Daniil Hunter's on the last year of his deal. Maybe they're looking at another tackle with Tunsil. Who knows? Joe Mixon, maybe second, third round, you're looking at a running back. You can use both of those guys. There's a lot of opportunity. The one thing is, for all the trust issues when it comes to the offensive side of the rock, when it comes to the draft, these mofos can execute. I think the 2024 draft was their most impressive display yet. 2025 is going to be interesting. Fortunately for them, because of what they did in 2024, they don't need a corner. They don't need a tackle. The positions that they need, a little bit easier to acquire. It's a Locker Room, #1 source for Texans digital content. Subscribe, like, ride along. We'll see you at the Combine. SNL at 4 p.m., Locker Room live stream. at 10:30. Always remember, when it comes to this Texan stuff, we're all in it together. Appreciate you for coming through.